President Trump addressed the United Nations this week, commenting on terrorism and the persecution of Christians. The vicious persecution of Christians continues in Syria, and New York seems poised to elect a socialist Muslim as mayor. With analysis of all these stories and more, I'm joined by foreign policy analyst, co-host of the War and Freedom podcast, Dr. Walid Phares. Walid, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for coming back. Some breaking news today. Turkish President Erdogan is in town this week to meet with President Trump. The two are expected to discuss defense, including the potential sale of the F-35 fighters, energy deals. Just recently, Ankara announced it was ending retaliatory tariffs against the U.S., and the Israeli Hamas conflict will most likely be addressed as well. This meeting follows on the heels of Trump's address to the UN, which we'll get to in a moment. Walid, your thoughts on that meeting with Erdogan? What is the outcome, if anything, particularly regarding those fighter jets, and how important Turkey is to the region, given the Hamas conflict?
I would start with, if anything, probably. Okay. That would be the major question about, are we going to see something? Or is it an illustration of the friendship that President Trump and President Erdogan have had for a long period of time and are trying to save it despite the problems on the ground? We know President Erdogan, Turkey, the government, has an issue with Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who also is another friend between, he is a friend with Trump. So now President Trump is a friend with two friends who are enemies at this point in time. So there could be the beginning of a moderation, meaning Turkish-Israeli plan for Syria. That's why I said we don't know if this is going to yield something, but this would be the general direction. With regard to the military industries, Turkey has one of the largest military industries that cooperate with the U.S., regardless of who's the president here and there. So the deep institution in both countries, they want to continue. But there are major, major problems in Syria.
Will human rights in Turkey be addressed, do you think? Or will they stick to economic and foreign policy?
They will be doing business. They will be dealing first with the business understanding. And that's the policy that we have right now, also in Syria, also with Iran, also with other places, to see if the president can resolve it with option A, which is, come on, let's do a deal. But if that doesn't work, as was the case in Iran, he will hit their forte.
There's a bizarre story out of Europe. Mystery drones are creating chaos over 4 airports in Denmark. The Danish government's considering whether to call in NATO over these incursions. Now, we've seen problems with Russian drones in Europe, particularly in Poland. What are you hearing about these incursions? Who do you think's behind them, and what's the purpose?
Well, you mentioned Poland. There we have a test. We knew exactly these were Russians. The Russians are sending a message to these countries, which in general are very combative and they want to support Ukraine and push back against the Russians. It's a test telling them, you Europeans, either you facilitate our understanding with President Trump on Ukraine and stop talking about a counteroffensive that goes all the way to Moscow or something, and let us work. Or else we have a lot of toys like these drones. But I don't think these waves of drones are offensive, meaning they come, they do some circles and leave. And that would leave those governments, including Denmark or Poland, to see if they will go back immediately to the U.S. and Britain and tell them, help us. That's a test, a major test.
Okay, President Trump was at the UN this week, and it was one for the history books. I mean, he complained about everything from the escalators to the teleprompter problems, terrorism to religious freedom. Watch.
Let us protect religious liberty, including for the most persecuted religion on the planet today. It's called Christianity.
Dr. Phares, what we've been talking about for years and years and years, the persecuted Christians, and you and I have talked about it for decades on this show. What are your thoughts about President Trump's support for persecuted Christians and putting that in the middle of his UN address?
That's very important. There is, as you know, you and I spoke about it, there is a huge pro-freedom movement in America. I mean, 2/3 of Congress. And there are conventions all year long on persecution of Christians in particular. And we know that 70%, 80% of the base of Trump, the voters, are Christian, and they are concerned about the persecution. So him placing that statement at the UN is extremely important, but you and I already will be talking about it when you're going to ask me, how about the Christians actually in the Middle East and mostly in Syria?
In Syria. I mean, there's an ongoing persecution in Syria. Congo, again, getting no coverage. Africa gets no coverage. They wipe out villages. They burn down churches. Nobody covers them. We cover them. But it's outrageous that the world isn't focused on this and that isn't part of American policy. Is this an indication that it will be or already is?
Where you're right, Raymond, is the coverage aside from the Catholic organizations like yours, your show specifically, it's very little, not just in Congo, but also in Nigeria. There have been massacres in Nigeria, in other places, and before that with Southern Sudan when we spoke about
years and years.
Yes, President Trump feel that there is a large community of American Christians, Catholics in particular, who are very concerned about these persecutions, and as we said, Syria. So he made a good move to talk about it. But then there need to be a dialogue between the White House is very good at that. I mean, they have task forces with pastors, with priests. That should go there. This discussion of the Christian persecution, meaning the principle is great, but what we're going to do on the ground,
right?
Especially when we go to these countries. In the past, it was Lebanon. Now it is Syria. You're right.
The president also signaled the nuclear threat posed by Iran.
There is no more serious danger to our planet today than the most powerful and destructive weapons ever devised by man, of which the United States, as you know, has many. Just as I did in my first term, I've made containing these threats a top priority, starting with the nation of Iran. My position is very simple. The world's #1 sponsor of terror can never be allowed to possess the most dangerous weapon.
Walid, has the U.S. managed to derail Iran's nuclear ambitions? How much remains at this point? How much of a threat?
Raymond, the Trump administration destroyed the Iranian nuclear threat. And I was like joking on my account on Twitter saying, why are we negotiating with them if the problem is gone? What is it behind it? What kind of deal is there behind since the threat is gone? The answer is that he's thinking about beyond his presidency. I mean, 3.5 years, and then what are the future U.S. president going to do about the actual regime? Because the regime may be now waiting for first of all, for our midterm, and they have a lot of tricks to play with the midterm,
right?
And then the end of this presidency to go back to the nuclear. I would say he is looking at longer term. What can we do? Should we keep that regime? Should we work with the opposition to disinstall it? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, you were always a big proponent of stoke civil society, allow the civil society there to move forward, and we'll see. After those strikes, I was surprised we didn't see a greater push.
That's a great point. That's a great point. We even discussed it here. There were like 3 days needed. Not for the American Air Force. The Israeli Air Force was on the ground to eliminate those militias known as Pasdaran or Basij. And people were moving to the streets. Qatar ran immediately to the United States and did a deal.
Well, for the first time in 60 years, a Syrian president addressed the UN. President Ahmad al-Shara said Wednesday that Syria is returning to the international community after 6 decades of a dictatorship. Now, that dictatorship killed 1 million people, tortured hundreds of thousands. What does this mean to the people of Syria, particularly the Christians who are undergoing the persecution we just talked about?
That's a big problem, Raymond. We have to be very clear and frank with our public, especially the Christians and Catholics in particular. Assad collapsed in December. That's a good news. He was a dictator, and he was also backing Hezbollah and the Islamic regime, and so on and so forth. What replaced him is not yet what we need to see in Syria. It's in transition. And because who elected, the current president? 300 jihadi commanders. I can give you the picture. And then second, yes, he has been recognized by Arabs, by our administration, but the issue is when will he start protecting the minorities? And we need to hear that from the minorities, including from the Christians, because all what we see on videos, social media, are Christian villages burning. I mean, you could go online now. You could show those pictures. So a real solution would have to be found for those minorities, especially the Northwest, where Alawites and Christians are.
I want to shift to this notion of recognizing a Palestinian state. I talked to Marco Rubio about this weeks ago. On September 21st, Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal announced they would formally recognize this Palestinian state. In days, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta are expected to do the same this week. What does this mean to the world and the stability of the region?
Let me educate our audience a little bit more. They may not remember, they should ask their own historians at their foreign policy circles, that this was done already by the United Nations in 1947, UN Resolution 181, partition plan, one Israel state, and then one Palestinian state. So that resolution exists. Why are they bringing back a specific resolution on the creation of the Palestinian state? I think this is a pressure on Israel. They want Israel to accept the ceasefire. And that is done by many countries around the world. But what is more important is Israel would even accept that to stop the fire against the Hamas, but wants guarantees that Hamas is not going to be the next government of Palestine. It's not about the idea of a Palestine. It's about who will rule it, jihadists or not. Everybody knows the current authority, Palestinian authority, is not good. They can't do it. They are not fighting Hamas. So maybe the Arab world, the Arab coalition, the UAE, Saudi, Egypt, who know very well that if Hamas rules the Palestinian state, guess who's the next target? It's not going to be Israel. It's going to be them.
There are reports that Qatar, who you mentioned earlier, are pouring billions into the U.S. education system, Walid. Tell us about this development, what Qatar hopes to gain through this financial infusion into these U.S. educational institutions. What are they getting for their money?
Raymond, we have been among the first ones 8 or 10 years ago to mention. I mean, you could go back to your videos that Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood are in fact pouring in money on campuses in the United States to control the classroom, to control who teaches the Middle East, who teaches foreign policy. And that's from sea to shining sea. And what is the result of that? Two things. Number one, they have influenced people inside various bureaucracies here and in, of course, Europe. But more important, those hundreds of thousands of demonstrators that we have been seeing since October 7 or even before, who are demonstrating not just against Israel, but against the very existence of the United States and our U.S. citizens. This is the result of Qatar influence in our classroom.
So they're kind of like the Confucius Institutes that China implanted in so many universities. This is the Middle Eastern version of that.
Absolutely, which preceded the China one. It had started actually after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I would say end of the 90s, not the beginning of the 90s. And I was screaming still, what's going on with our Middle East programs? Why are we not mentioning the ethnic minorities, the Christian minorities? Well, because of the Qatar money. And it's true, it's $100 billion. Let me give you the better one. So Qatar, which is helping the United States or trying or saying so, has pledged $1.2 trillion. I don't know how to count that. So with the Iran deal, there was $150 billion being invested and then invested back in the United States. What can you say about $1 trillion? Nobody can stop it. No media, no academia, nothing. No politician. This is an invasion.
But you believe it changes it changes not only what people are being taught on university campuses, but everything in the wider universe.
That's everything.
Wow.
That's everything. That's why you see. Let me end it with this one. A total silence on the persecution of Christian minorities in the Middle East, because there are no more voice. Without you and a few others, everything has been taken by that influence.
Outrageous. On Wednesday, a shooter opened fire from a nearby roof on a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Center in Dallas, killing one detainee and wounding another. He eventually took his own life. Although the motivation for the attack is unknown, the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, released a photo on social media that shows a bullet found at the scene with the words anti-ICE written in what appears to be marker. Walid, there is this alarming escalation in these shooters. Tell me what we're seeing and combine it with the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk, which this shooter obviously is copycatting in some way.
It is all a one mother machine. Everything you see, even the individual criminal who is perpetrating the attack doesn't know why he's doing this, because he's manipulated by these, Italian-like systems of medieval art, but it's a very bad art, killing people. The money that has been circulating has been not just touching the classrooms, but also social media. And then from social media, they would identify the people behind. I mean, those who wants to actually attack our national security, to actually disorient the administration and create conditions for civil war. That's what this far left / jihadi group, and we don't want to go into who is moving this, but we almost know who's moving this. That's what they're trying to do. Now, these attacks against authority, against units, this is to weaken our system on the border. The assassination of Kirk, a great man, is basically to disorient the masses, because the movement that he led, along with other movements, was actually rising as a resistance to what they were trying to do, including Antifa and the rest.
According to the New York Post, Democratic mayoral nominee Zohran Mamdani holds a dominant 20-point lead in that New York mayoral race, boosted by majority support from blacks, Latinos, Asian voters. According to a new poll released Tuesday, Mamdani leads independent candidate and former Governor Andrew Cuomo 45% to 25%, Walid.
That's huge.
I mean, I won't even. Curtis Slee was down at 9%. The current mayor, Eric Adams, 8%. What does this race mean to those outside of New York City?
That's the whole point, Raymond. First of all, he gathered everything that you can gather, all his machines, all the organizations. They, as they have been demonstrating for the last 2, 3, 4 years, since 2020, the summer of 2020. So that side of the bloc has been organizing, found one candidate, and putting all the resources we can see, and the resources behind them that we were talking about. Unfortunately, on the other side, there were divisions that don't even have one united candidate. And unfortunately, they didn't understand what the NGO work for over 4 to 5 to 6 years meant in reality. It's a replacement of the political class, ruling political class, both Republican and Democrat, and bringing in the most radical that we have ever seen.
Yeah, but the face of this candidate, he's a great candidate. I mean, he smiles, he's young, he's bouncing around. Look, he's a son of a director. I mean, this is not a dumb kid who came up from nothing. But he is an amazing figure and face for what I think we all are in agreement. It's a poisonous ideology that he carries.
Oh, totally. He is, and others in Congress before him tried to be the nice face of a dragon. And I don't mean it in terms of personal attack. I mean as a political machine. The political machine was prepared before him. That's Antifa. That's all the various organizations. So they needed a person who would represent the nice face of that dragon while moving forward. Every political party in Europe used the same tactic, meaning focus mostly on the character, how cool it is, how etc. But reality, when they get to power, look what happened in the 8 years of Obama and the 4 years of Biden. That's going to be a replica of it.
Wow. We'll leave it there. Walid Phares, his book, Iran, an Imperialist Republic and U.S. Policy, is still available at bookstores everywhere. Walid Phares, always a pleasure.
Thank you.